Right, good morning all. It's now 12 o'clock, so welcome to today's webinar, which is actually on imposter syndrome. I'm Claire Harvey and I'm the UK Managing Director at Reed Specialist Recruitment. And joining us today to talk about this really interesting topic is Yvette Jeal, our Executive Coach. Good morning, Yvette.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Yvette is an international executive coach who works with senior leaders across the globe. She's renowned for helping her clients get to the core of who they really are and understand what drives and motivates them, and then work on their growth areas. And throughout Yvette's coaching journey, she noticed a common trait that would show up in many of her successful clients. And that is what we're here today to learn a little bit more about, which is imposter syndrome. At the end of Yvette's 30-minute talk today, you will have the opportunity to put your questions you have to her. If you notice, there'll be a chat function on the top right-hand side, and if you could pop your questions either with your name or anonymously, and then we're going to spend probably about 15 minutes at the end of today's talk, hopefully to answer any questions that you might want to ask Yvette directly. So Yvette, you actually had a really interesting story which you shared with me on how you first came about imposter syndrome. Perhaps you could share with the audience today.
Yes, I first came about this a few years ago when I was out, and I ended up having a conversation with a couple of lawyers. And when they found out I was a coach, one of these lawyers said to me, you know, what do you think about imposter syndrome? And at the time, I'd never heard of it. So I said, what is it? And he explained this guy was a really successful lawyer, and he'd recently won an award for being top in his field. And he was up on stage and he was receiving this award. And at that moment when he was on stage, he had two thoughts. The first one was, you know, I've got my job for another year. And the second one was, they haven't found me out yet. And as he's telling me this, I'm thinking, this is really familiar. I know this myself, and I've seen it show up in a lot of my clients. So I went back home, I researched this, and I put a workshop together. And before I knew it, I was delivering this workshop in the city to 10 HRDs. And they just loved it so much because they were able to share their stories, and it just kind of went from there, really. And recently, I've been invited to be interviewed for an academic study on the topic, so you can see how far it's come.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for that. I mean, it is a topic that I personally find really interesting, and I'm sure many of our clients who've joined us today have perhaps felt imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. So yeah, without further ado, perhaps you could talk us through your slides today.
Absolutely. So we're going to start with what is imposter syndrome, how it shows up, and what you can actually do about it. So I like to call it, well, let's start with a definition. Imposter syndrome is a concept describing high achieving individuals who are marked by the inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. So this was actually discovered back in 1978 by two psychologists, Suzanne Innes and Pauline Clance, and they noticed this phenomenon in a group of very successful women who were highly successful in their careers, yet couldn't seem to internalize this and had very high levels of self-doubt. And this is when imposter syndrome was coined. And obviously since then, it's in more recent years that we've sort of started to look at the psychology behind this. And we also noticed that this shows up in men and women right across the board. So I like to let's take a look at, you know, what types of people have imposter syndrome. So I don't know if anybody's heard of Amy Cuddy, who is well known for her TED talk on body language. And she wrote a book called Presence a few years ago, and she went back to interview Pauline Clance, and who coined imposter syndrome, and asked her, about it. And Pauline said if she could take time back, she would rename it, because it's not a syndrome, it's not a mental illness, it is actually an experience which almost everyone will have at some stage in their life, which I think is quite reassuring, because often when we're suffering from this, we feel very alone in it, and knowing that other people are suffering from it is helpful. So I like to call it the 3 flavours in how it shows up. The first one is I'm a fraud, and this is the fear of your cover being blown or being unmasked. The second one is I got lucky. So this is where people put everything down to luck. So, you know, they're lucky that they got where they are, they're lucky about their network, they're lucky about the people that support them, and they don't actually take ownership that they may have attributed or contributed to this luck or success. And the third one is this old thing. So this is when, you know, people are doing really well, they're achieving awards, they're, you know, succeeding, and they just play everything down. So let's take a look at the first one in a little more detail. I'm a fraud. So this is like the naked dream, where you're walking down the street and you suddenly look down and you realise you forgot to get dressed. It's that awful fear of being exposed. And to bring this to life, I'll tell you about a client I worked with a few years ago. And this particular client was a leader who was like a high potential leader, and the business had spotted her as somebody they wanted to progress through the business, and they employed me to coach her for a year. And when we started working together, this client was working from a finance background. She worked in finance and she really knew her stuff. And she had to attend board meetings. And every time she would sit around the board table, she would go to contribute, she would go to speak, and she'd hold herself back. She'd have a complete confidence crisis, thinking that everybody knew more than her and feeling intimidated by the other people around the table. So in the next slide, we're going to look at how we tackled this. So on the left in the white bubble is where my client was sitting. She was imagining that, you know, she knew this and everybody else around the table knew more than her, when actually she was the only one around the table that knew about the finance, and they really needed to hear what she had to say. And so we worked on what the actual reality of the situation was, which is that she knew her sphere of knowledge and they all knew theirs. And we worked on this over a year. We helped her to find her voice, to feel confident to contribute, and gradually this happened. And it's a really good story, because at the end of that year, this client was actually made a board director herself. And to this day, she's a huge advocate for others that are progressing up through the business with similar feelings to what she had. And I just think, how great is that for herself, but also for the business, what they would have been missing out on if she'd not overcome these feelings of imposter syndrome. So moving on to the next slide, which is I got lucky. So I don't know if any of you have either yourselves ever thought that this is all down to luck, or you've heard people in your team say this. Another example of a client I worked with a while back, she was actually doing incredibly well in her career, so much so that she had landed a job in the city, and she was going to be a partner in a firm, and it was about to be announced in the Financial Times. So I get this phone call and it's complete panic, and you know, she's freaking out saying it's going to be in the FT, I'm going to get discovered, they're going to find out I'm just lucky, everything's just been luck. And so we had this session booked down in Brighton. So I decided to take her down to the sea, and I knew this technique that I really wanted to use with her. Now, if you're not by the sea and you want to do something similar, you can use anything that's around you, lampposts, fence, even just, draw it and just use a timeline. I use the railings, and I got her to go and stand at the end of the railings, right back at the beginning of her career, and to gradually walk up the railings and use each nodule as a different stage in her career. And as she did that, I asked her questions, you know, so tell me about that time, what were you doing in that role, and what was your contribution, what was the outcome, what was your input, what did you do that actually, you know, made that happen? And as she started to walk up this timeline, she really started to remember things and everything that she'd done. And when we got to the end, she sort of looked back down the timeline and she looked at me and smiled and was like, I actually do deserve this, don't I? You know, and she went off into that job feeling really confident and has continued to thrive. But I think what happens is that we're moving at such a pace in life and we're moving so fast, and sometimes we don't catch up with ourselves and all the things that we've done. And doing this exercise is really good to sort of embody our growth and our wins and how far we've evolved. So that's I got lucky. The next one is this old thing. So here on the screen you can see many very well-known faces, and you have Renee there with her Oscar, Tom Hanks and Serena and all the others, and these people have openly spoken about having imposter syndrome. Despite all their accolades, all their awards, they've all woken up with imposter syndrome. And I've got a couple of quotes here, one from Maya Angelou, the political activist and writer. She says, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everyone and they're going to find me out. And then Neil Gaiman, who's a children's author, I love this one. The problem with any kind of success is the unshakable conviction that you're getting away with something and that any moment they'll discover you. It's the imposter syndrome, something my wife calls the fraud police. I like that. So if these guys can feel it, then obviously it's very easy for any of us to feel it. And it leads me on to the next slide, which is around a conference I went to a few years ago, and the keynote was an Olympic swimmer. And I always remember her saying this. It's a very simple slide, but she said that in life, there are two things that we all look for, and one is acceptance and one is achievement. Everybody wants to be accepted and everybody wants to achieve. However, we're all so terrified of the opposite of these, which is rejection and failure. And the truth is, if we're not trying to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, then you're very unlikely to experience imposter syndrome. Because if you're staying within your comfort zone, then you're not going to have the feeling of being an imposter. But what is it they say, that progress begins at the end of your comfort zone? So if you do want to move forward, if you do want to grow, if you do want to try things that are new, then failure is part of that journey. There aren't many people that have succeeded in life that haven't failed hundreds of times. You know, there's quotes around it, there's basketball players, there's people that talk about this all the time. The failures are part of the journey, and it's about failing fast and taking the learnings out of it. So that brings me on to one of my favourite all-time quotes by Brené Brown. Brené Brown says, you know, you either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. And I just love this quote because, you know, we're here for such a fleeting time on this earth, and each and every one of us is walking our own path and travelling our own journey. And we've all had different life experiences that have shaped us and brought us to where we are today. And you are the only one that can actually see life through your lens. No one else can see life how you do. So this is your essence, this is the personal brand, your stuff that you bring to the table. And Brené, she talks in her Call to Courage documentary on Netflix about when she became famous. She's actually a researcher stroke storyteller, but she became famous and shot to fame by her TED talk on vulnerability. And suddenly she was really well known. Suddenly people were writing about her. Lots of that stuff was good, but there was also lots of negative stuff and trolls and people saying horrible things about her. And she had to find a way to deal with that. So she found a way, and her way was, you know what, if you're not out there in the arena pushing yourself and stretching yourself, then you're not worthy of, I don't want to hear your feedback, you know. And I thought that was really great, because most people that are out there striving, working hard, trying to do better, they support other people that are doing the same. And so I think it's really important to be selective over the feedback that you consider. Okay, we are now moving on to the imposter busters. So this is my contribution. I mean, I'm sure there's many people out there that talk about imposter syndrome and probably have some great things to add. This is my personal contribution that I've discovered on my journey with my clients. So the first one is, when you have this feeling, accept and understand that it is just a feeling, it's just an emotion. And emotions are just energy in motion. So the first thing to do is to stop, breathe and center. And the reason we want to do this is because we want to move from the limbic part of the brain to the frontal cortex, so the emotional center to the logical center. So if you just stop for a moment when you get this feeling and get comfortable with it, work out where it is in the body, maybe place your hand on it and do some breathing into it and just letting it dissipate. And once you've done that, maybe talk about it. It's worth, you know, now that we're getting this out in the open and everybody's starting to know what imposter syndrome is, let people know, you know, I'm having an imposter syndrome moment. Share, other people are suffering from it too. The third one is to really put it into perspective. And, you know, when you really want to put something into perspective, just go out at night time and look at the sky. You know, we are on this planet spinning round in a massive galaxy. You know, we are so small in comparison to what's going on around us. And even further, other people are not as interested in your stuff as you are. I can guarantee it. You know, your stuff is really important to you. You're really focused on it. But other people have got their lives, they've got their jobs, they've got their children, their families, their health to worry about. So when you are doing a presentation or speaking up at a meeting, you're just a very small part of their day, and they're not as focused on you as you imagine they would be. So really, it's your opportunity to say it, make it engaging, and make it matter. The next one would be to create a log of your achievements and compliments. And the reason I say this is because our brains just absolutely love to go to the one negative thing that's happened that day. So you might have done 100 great things, but something didn't go quite right and your brain wants to go to the negative, and maybe that's the thing that keeps you awake at night that you're trying to resolve. If you keep a log of things that happen that are good, so let's just say you have a nice email, things that you've achieved, or a client you've helped, or positive things that have happened in your work life or personal life, and you put them in a log on your desktop. I actually know a client that did this. And then you're having one of those moments. Just click on that, open it up, and remind yourself that all those things did happen. That's real evidence. And whenever we're feeling emotion, backing it up with evidence is always a really good leveler. So that's that one. And I say surround yourself by your champions. And when I say champions, I mean, we all need people in life that support us. That it might be your boss, it might be your colleagues, it might be your coach, it might be a whole group of people that lift you up when you need it. And obviously you do that for other people. It's having people around you that you trust that you value their opinion, and that have got your back. And will also be straight shooters and tell you when, you know, things aren't so good. So it's really important to surround yourself by your champions. And also owning your achievements. So remember the railings, remember to step into your power, to own the steps along the way, own your growth, own your wins, and really remind yourself of these things. These are your personal brand. These are you and what you bring to the table. And for those people that are managing others, it's really good to remind them of this as well. You know, in reviews, it's almost taking them back down those railings, even if it's just over the last month, what they did, how they did it, getting them to understand their worth. And last but not least is lose your fear of failure. And, you know, we all have a fear of failure, but it's just about overcoming it and feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and keep walking forward along those railings and in the next steps of your career. So that's the final point of my Imposter Busters. I have to tell you about a career transition program that I run, and this is helping people overcome imposter syndrome and owning their brand and sort of taking their career forward. I believe that there's going to be details sent out after the end of this webinar, and you can get in touch with me below. Thank you very much. Claire, you're muted.
Thanks, Yvette. So one of the perils of working from home is the next door neighbour you can't control when they start making noise. Yeah, no, thanks. I'll start that again. Thanks, Yvette. That was really interesting, and I think it's a topic I know I personally find quite fascinating, and it's so interesting to see so many famous people suffer with this as well. We have had some questions come through. The first one is a longish one, so I'm gonna read it out to you. Okay, so while a lot of imposter syndrome is clearly negative and can be debilitating, isn't it sometimes a bit helpful in that sometimes people who are totally lack any self-critical faculties have an overblown view of their own abilities, who then crash and burn big time?
Oh, I absolutely love that question. That's so fantastic. So yes, I do think a little bit of imposter syndrome is a good thing. One of the reasons is maybe it's not imposter syndrome. Maybe it's your gut just telling you a little warning sign that maybe there's a little bit more preparation that needs to be done. And it's always working out that balance, because over preparation causes imposter syndrome. It's like perfectionism. But sometimes it might be that there is a little bit of something else you need to do. And so having that little warning sign is a good thing. There is also the opposite of imposter syndrome, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, but that's another whole webinar. So, but that's an amazing question.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, as you say, there is an opposite, an absolute opposite to imposter syndrome as well, which is probably another interesting webinar. Or there are probably people who wouldn't join it because they wouldn't recognise it in themselves. Yeah. We've got another question for you. Mm-hmm. If you feel you have imposter syndrome, how do you think you can best check in or question your feelings at work without letting your peers doubt you when maybe they never realised you had it in your head? That's a great question.
Wow, that's interesting. I think it's all about people who are leading the team, allowing open channels of communication, allowing a little bit of vulnerability, because nobody has got this nailed. Nobody. I coach people of all levels, and I'm telling you that everybody has self-doubt. Everybody has those moments. And so making it an open platform within your teams to talk about it and say, oh, I'm having a moment. Everybody needs reminding of, you know, how good they are. And so I just think making the right environment is really important. And vulnerability is not something I understand about not wanting to seem like you doubt yourself in front of your colleagues, but it's balancing that out, isn't it? It's being able to be vulnerable in those moments of vulnerability.
Yeah, thanks, Yvette. We have another one. How do you manage the negative self-talk after a big presentation or a meeting? You can be super prepared to deliver a great performance and then unpick all you have done. Yeah, I can be guilty of this one sometimes.
I love that question, and there's some great questions today. That's a good one. So this inner critic that we have in our head, I always say to people, you know, would you talk to a friend the way you talk to yourself? And it's, you know, the voice that's in your head criticizing you, you would never talk to a friend like that. And I think the fact is a bit like in the webinar when I was saying, you're out there, you're doing it. It might not be perfect, but you're out there doing it. You're out there in the arena. And if there's things that you can improve, then you're going to take that learning into your next one. And it's about allowing yourself to be human. And humans are not perfect. Definitely. Is that a good answer? I don't know if I've answered the question very well.
I think so. No, definitely. We've got a question from a lady called Helen. Do you think the pandemic has heightened imposter syndrome in people?
I do, Helen. I actually do. I think that it's not natural for us to be isolated and alone and not with our colleagues, with our people. We're not having those kind of conversations where you just, you know, bump into people making a coffee or at the water cooler. And I think it allows a lot of negative self-talk. You know, we've been thrown into fight or flight. We've had, you know, our health, our jobs threatened. And so I think people start to doubt, you know, how they're doing. And I do think it does heighten it. And I think we have to remember that we don't become suddenly bad overnight. You know, the pandemic doesn't mean that we're no longer good at our job. It just means that we're trying to do it in an incredibly tough time. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a question relating to the this topic that was brought up by Michelle Obama. So Michelle Obama spoke about imposter syndrome, and I really related to this because there are individuals that aim to make you feel like an imposter, even when you know you've worked really hard to get where you are. Can this be addressed beyond that moment of feeling an imposter?
Individuals that make you feel like, you mean they take pride in sort of making you feel like that?
Yeah, that was the question. So yeah, people who perhaps make you feel that you've been lucky or feel that you've were there at the right time, for instance.
Well, this is about having a strong inner core yourself, because there will always be people around like that in life, and it's about how you feel inside. So I would say that those people are not as far along the journey. If they need to do that to feel good about themselves, then again, you don't want their feedback. Even if they're higher up the corporate ladder than you, they're not somebody that you want to really value their feedback. It's about feeling strong inside of yourself and knowing that, you know, you've got integrity and that you've got to where you're owning your journey and owning your story. So I think there's always going to be those people out there, and it's about working on your own inner core and strength to be confident in what you do.
Yeah, maybe using that railings example, maybe even if you're doing it yourself, have that inner checkpoint through your career and that kind of acknowledgement, isn't it?
And keeping the people around you, you know, that really it's really important that we lift like attracts like, you know. So if you have people around you that you really resonate with and that you know have got your back and you've got theirs, that's what you need in life. Let the others go off on their journey and get on with it.
Yeah, this is another great question, Yvette. As you learn to delegate as a manager, I find that you give more responsibility and then develop the fear that your team are better than you. which then leads to a feeling of, am I good enough? So the question is, how do you balance that?
Oh, that is such a great question. Who answered that question?
It actually comes through as anonymous. So
anonymous. Okay, yeah. That's a really, really great question. I think this is a wonderful question, and that is that when you're the expert, and so let's just say, you know, whatever field you're in, you're the expert and the light is shining on you, the spotlight is on you. When you move up to become a manager or a leader, it's about taking recognition in the reflected light of your team. And so it's about moving across and thinking, by developing that team and bringing them up and upskilling them, good leaders, you know, actually do hire people that are better than them. That's what you want to be doing, you know, you want to be actually hiring people that are better than you. And that's all about leadership. And it's just moving from the spotlight yourself into the reflected glory of your team, and being comfortable in your own leadership and, you know, in yourself, that it's okay for people to you know, shine bright. You're allowing them to shine, and that's moving from management to leadership.
Thanks, Yvette. We've got another question for you. Okay, how can I keep my train of thought when speaking in large groups? I tend to go off in another direction when speaking if I get nervous, and if I make a mistake or doubt what I'm saying or come up against a question I wasn't expecting, then I panic. And I think in my mind I sound really stupid, or I've said things wrong and everybody knows. I think I've probably done that in the past as well.
It's really tough, isn't it? It's really tough speaking in a live event, or because the spotlight's on you, you know, and what if I have a blank? What if I just can't think what to say? And I think, you know, taking a breath and pausing, and even just some of those, you know, pausing, you know, taking a breath and pausing for a moment, just giving yourself time to, you know, recharge, take a moment, like I'm doing right now, because I haven't got the exact answer for you. But also remembering that you are human, and it's okay to be human. It's okay to be authentic. It's okay not to have the answer. It's okay to say, I'll come back to you on that one. And just really trusting yourself that you've got this. Just really trusting yourself, thinking about, you know, before you go on stage, before you do that live event, maybe just think about, give yourself a talking to before you go on. Be your own best friend, you know. You actually introduced me to somebody who gave me some fantastic training on presentation, and it was very much about storytelling. And I always think that if you're telling a story that's true, you don't tend to worry if it's come across silly or a lie, or you don't have to worry about your words, because it's just a true story and it's actually quite engaging. That's true. And that's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, it was really powerful for me. So we do have another question. Okay. Do you think people at the very beginning of their career feel this, and how can we support them?
Oh, I'm so glad you've asked me that, because I was, without giving anything away, I was recently coaching someone, and this person was at the beginning of their career and they'd done incredibly well. Obviously being older and looking at what they'd done and how they'd done it, I could see why they'd been fast-tracked. So they'd been fast-tracked. They had skipped a step of the journey from graduate to having a job. And they just couldn't understand why this had happened. You know, what was different about what they were doing? Why were they, you know, why had this happened to them? And so I do think, yes, starting out, when positive things happen, I think, you know, this person was probably putting it down to luck, being in the right place at the right time. I could see that they were absolutely smashing it, and they were a really amazing employee, you know, and just the way they were approaching things was really inspirational. But maybe they can't see that themselves at that stage. It won't be until later on in life when they look back and see that they did stand out, that they deserved that success. So I think, yes, people can have this at any stage of their career.
And another question for you, Yvette. Is imposter syndrome and a lack of confidence the same thing?
That's a really good question. I think
I've met some people who've had imposter syndrome, but probably are also super confident.
Yeah.
Or appear to be anyway.
Yeah. I do think they can combine. I do think that you know, low self-esteem is another thing, and that's something you have to work on to build up your self-esteem. I think imposter syndrome is often when, you know, you are successful, but it's when you're moving into something that you don't really know. It's the unknown. You're moving into something where you think, oh, am I really qualified to do this? You know, so I think they kind of cross over, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and I think this might be our last question for the session, Yvette. And it's probably a good one to end it on, actually, is how do you help your clients overcome these feelings of imposter syndrome?
Well, a lot of my clients, I mean, I talk a lot about, I work with leaders, but, you know, this goes for anybody of any level working their way up, you know, through their career. I work with my clients to really own their story, because in business, you know, you're either selling something, whatever you're doing, it's all about communication, and confidence really does come from within. So I help them to really understand what their journey's been, what's shaped them, what's you know, what they bring to the table, what they offer, and we work on this through things like the career transition program, through personal brand, and I really get them to talk about it, and until it becomes second nature, until they really do know what their story is, and that's really how, you know, we overcome any obstacles that they have in the way. It might be, you know, just different approaches to things, communication, finding their voice, whatever it is. Each client is an individual, and each client has different things they want to work on. So that's how I get them to overcome it.
Brilliant, thanks for that. I think that's a perfect way to end today's webinar. So thank you so much for taking the time, Yvette, to talk us through imposter syndrome. Thank you. Oh yeah, thanks, Yvette. The webinar has been recorded, and we will share it with everybody that has registered to join the event today. And also, please feel free, if you'd like to share the webinar with colleagues or friends, or anyone that you might think would find it useful. And we plan to do some more webinars, so please look out for details of our up and coming events on our LinkedIn profile, or contact obviously one of our consultants who'll be able to tell you what webinars we have planned for the rest of this year. But I hope everyone enjoyed that. Once again, thanks, Yvette. It was really, really interesting, and I hope everyone has a really great afternoon. Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us.